All right, welcome to today's call. I'm going to continue with the theme that we've been following lately, which is COVID, of course, as if we're not tired of it. But I want to continue because it's exciting that new research continues to come out that is supporting what I and many other doctors have said since day one, and that is that your nutrition, your lifestyle, all of these things matter and directly impact your risk of not only contracting the infection, but also your risk of having a severe case. And in today's call, I want to discuss the cytokine storm that you've probably heard about in the news that's associated with COVID and that can be caused by COVID. And it's particularly relevant in the elderly population, which is the most vulnerable population to having a severe outcome for multiple reasons, which we'll discuss today. But what you're told by the news is that if you're 60 plus or 70 plus with comorbidities, you're at higher risk, and that's where the greatest amount of deaths are at. You know, the nursing homes, there was a statistic a couple months ago that 43% of the deaths in the United States occurred in nursing homes. So why are we shutting down the entire economy if 43% is nursing homes? We should do selective lockdowns, was the argument that some people and scientists and studies made. And the cytokine storm is what drives the acute respiratory distress syndrome, what was thought to be the need for the respirator, and ultimately the demise of certain people, and typically elderly people, from COVID. So I want to dive into the cytokine storm today. What is that? Why does it affect the elderly more? And what can we do from a natural perspective to help ourselves and set the elderly up for a better outcome, hopefully to prevent the infection, but then if they contract the infection, a better outcome, less severe, and ultimately recovery in life versus respirator and death. So this study is in the journal Aging, Clinical and Experimental Research, and the title is Cytokine Storm in Aged People with COVID-2, Possible Role of Vitamins as Therapy or Preventive Strategy. And basically, it's been known in the research for a long time that as we age, our immune system declines physiologically, okay? So what that means is there is normal decline of the immune system with age. Now, that normal decline can be sped up by piling on top of it an unhealthy lifestyle, comorbidities, a toxic environment, those sorts of things. But all of us from age 50 on will start to have a declining immune system. And specifically, it's the part of the immune system that deals with viruses and intracellular infections. So that's why we see the aged population deal with more infection, more chronic infection, and more cancer, because the same part of the immune system is in charge of surveillance for intracellular infection and for cancer cells. And that is called the Th1 immune response. And so there's a nice graphic in this paper here that shows us the immune system and a balance here. And basically what we want to have is a balance between a pro-inflammatory state and an anti-inflammatory state. Okay. If you read blogs or listen to the media, you may think we don't want to have any inflammation, right? Everyone says, eat this, it's anti-inflammatory. Don't eat this, it's pro-inflammatory. But nature likes balance more than it likes absolutes, okay? So there's actually a physiologic amount of inflammation we should have, because that physiologic inflammation is like a primer for the system, right? It keeps the system on its toes so that it doesn't fall asleep, but it's not so active that it's shooting itself, right? So we don't want to have zero inflammation, and we don't want to have too much inflammation. We should have this balance between a pro-inflammatory state that's ready to respond if you're injured or if you're infected, and an anti-inflammatory state that is kind of keeping your immune system at bay so that it doesn't overreact to self and puts out fires once, say, COVID is killed. So if you have a virus, you should become inflamed. The immune system should activate against that virus and kill it. But then once it's killed, it should calm back down and go back to its resting inflammatory state. If it stays inflamed once the virus is gone, now there's collateral damage, and you can damage self and maybe drive autoimmune disease and things of that nature. So this image of the scales gives us an idea of what that should look like graphically or from a picture standpoint. And in the text underneath, you can see that in aged people, which we'll call 60 plus for the purposes of this call, and in aged people, there's a pro-inflammatory, a net pro-inflammatory cytokine pattern. And so cytokine storm, cytokine pattern, what is that? For lay people, it sounds like a fancy word, but cytokine basically is just a protein messenger that the body makes. And there's pro-inflammatory cytokines, there's anti-inflammatory cytokines. So you can think of it as maybe a text message that the immune system is sending out to the environment. And some are inflammatory, some are anti-inflammatory. Well, as we hit 50 and our immune system starts to decline, we start to ramp up our inflammatory state from that kind of baseline appropriate physiologic state to a more net pro-inflammatory state. With that, the strength of the immune system response decreases with age, particularly against infection. And you can see here B lymphocytes, which are cells that drive antibody production. They show a decreased ability in responding to viral infections like influenza or COVID, and in producing antibodies, which show decreased binding activity against their antigens. So in a normal situation, you contract a virus. The immune system recognizes it and it attacks, okay? It basically, you have a cell infected with flu virus, say, and a white blood cell comes and phagocytizes or eats that cell. By eating that cell, yes, you lose your own cell, but you also kill the virus. That white blood cell presents some of the matter from the meal it just ate to the lymph nodes, and in the lymph nodes are different cells, and B cells will produce antibodies. So there's an antibody that recognizes a receptor for that flu virus or that COVID virus, SARS-CoV-2 virus, or whatever we're talking about. And then the antibodies go out into the periphery and look for more. And if they see it, they bind it and they mark that cell for destruction. So that is the antibody binding the antigen. The antigen is just the thing that it's looking for and binds. So right here, the study says aged people have deficits in their B lymphocytes, which have decreased ability to respond to viral infections like flu, and decreased ability to produce antibodies. And when they produce antibodies, they show decreased binding activity for their target. Okay, so even the response they mount is less effective than it used to be. So we want to say, okay, there's normal physiologic aging and decline of this response. We don't want to pile on additional decline, or we don't want to speed up that decline by having an unhealthy lifestyle, an unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, isolation, stress, etc. So these are things we can address to promote optimal immune response in the aged population. Now, there are genetic contributions as well. And this graphic here is kind of weird looking. But basically this box shape with all these colors on it, each side of this square, the little squares, colored squares inside, are genes. And each of those genes combine to code for an inflammatory cytokine. So this red interleukin 8 is an inflammatory cytokine. Interleukin 6, COX-2, and interleukin 17. Those are 4 pro-inflammatory cytokines that are part of the cytokine storm that can drive acute respiratory distress syndrome or lung damage in COVID, driving death. Now, this red thing in the middle is a COVID virion or viral particle. And you can see the red arrows drive or increase the genetic action of these genes to produce these cytokines. So the virus drives cytokine production, and if it gets out of hand, you have the storm and potential severe outcome. Well, look at these green arrows. The green arrows inhibit the viral production or the viral increase driving of the production of the inflammatory cytokines. Those green arrows, the inhibition is driven by vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin C. So this study is saying that in the elderly, the immune system declines, and the elderly are also commonly known to be deficient in fat-soluble and hydrosoluble or water-soluble vitamins. And what are those? Those are vitamins A, D, E, and C. And those are key nutrients needed for optimal immune function, optimal antiviral defenses. All of those early in the COVID pandemic were sworn off by, the CDC and the media as false science. They're useless. You can't boost your immune system. Well, there's piles of research. I was saying it then, I'm saying it now. There's always been research showing that they actually are completely necessary to be healthy and to have an immune system that can produce a robust response to COVID or any other trigger. And here's yet another study showing us specific to COVID that that's true. So in our age population, we want to make sure the fat-soluble and water-soluble vitamins are optimal. And by doing that, we can prevent COVID infection or promote optimal clearance of the infection without a negative outcome. And this last graphic shows us how that happens. So if we contract SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID, that can spread, like we talked about last week, to all different kinds of tissues and create what seems like unrelated multi-system organ failure. But if you remember last week's call, we talked about how SARS attacks the endothelium, which is that basement lining of your blood vessels. And if we damage the endothelium, we're damaging the organs that the vessels are going to. And in some people, that's kidney. In some people, that's gut, that's liver, that's lungs, that's brain. It depends on the individual. So if we can prevent the endothelial damage, we can prevent bad outcome. If we can prevent infection and prevent an inappropriate immune response in a cytokine storm, we can prevent severe outcome. And again, this graphic, this study, and many other studies repeat that vitamin A, D, E, and C are key to driving an appropriate immune response to the infection and preventing an inappropriate, over-robust inflammatory response. How do they do that? Those vitamins promote T regulatory cells. And T regulatory cells are the cells of the immune system that quiet it, right? So if the immune system is a symphony or an orchestra, the T regulatory cells are the conductor, right? So they're pointing over here and telling the woodwinds when to play and the strings when to play and percussion quiet down, and so they're orchestrating the response. So if we have optimal Treg cells, then they're going to optimally coordinate the immune response to a COVID or to a cancer cell or to whatever we have to respond to. But if we have insufficient vitamins that are required for T regulatory cells to be produced and differentiate and function, then we get a net pro-inflammatory response, which sets us up for that cytokine storm and that severe outcome. So the bottom line, again, hopefully you guys are tired of hearing this from me, is that your diet matters, your nutrient levels matter, your physical activity matters, your sleep matters, your community matters. All of it matters because it all impacts the immune system. And obviously, if we don't have a good immune system, we're at higher risk of COVID infection and severe outcome. But if we can optimize it, we can be the 99.96% that don't have to worry about it. And then the population that is most susceptible, the elderly or the aged, this is something we should be doing for all of them. We shouldn't just be locking them into the nursing home and not letting visitors in. We should be testing them for their fat soluble vitamin levels and then repleting those levels if those people need it, among many other things, like not isolating them and keeping them moving, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope this adds to the puzzle for you and the eureka and the understanding that you don't have to fear COVID. What you should fear is being malnourished. And what you should fear is living the standard American lifestyle, because that's what sets you up for COVID or H1N1 or whatever the next pandemic is that pops on the scene. So regardless of the pandemic or the thing that the next thing we have to fight, right? Regardless of what it is, the underlying theme that's always going to be necessary is a healthy lifestyle. And I made a video a long time ago, maybe it was March or April, called Principles Over Pandemic, again saying, regardless of the pandemic or the issue at hand, the same principles apply. Your nutrition, your sleep, your physical activity, et cetera, et cetera. So I am now blue in the face, so I'll stop saying it and open up for questions. Just unmute yourself if you have one.
I do have a question.
Sure.
Does this article happen to list recommended dosages for 60 and up?
It doesn't, and you'll probably never find one that does, because each 60 and up is different, right? It's that ambiguity, the uniqueness, and so that's why the testing would help us understand what does the person need, so we can do it specific to the person. But
Exactly.
there is research, not in COVID, but with measles virus. Measles is one of the #1 killers worldwide in third world countries. And the WHO put out research, I think it was in 2007, that said with acute measles virus, people can take 100,000 IU of vitamin A a day for up to 5 days safely, right? So in that acute response, you don't want to do that long term, but for 3 to 5 days, that can be useful in the context of an acute infection. And the reason for that is what I showed you on here in terms of what it does to inhibiting genetic expression of inflammation. But vitamin A also big time is key to mucosal barrier function. And so whether we're talking about lungs, gut, sinus, bladder, if you've got an infection there, vitamin A is going to help maintain the mucosal integrity. It's going to help support the antiviral defenses. It plays many roles. And then same idea, like vitamin D, we could test them, dose them appropriately. Vitamin E appropriately. Vitamin C, so the fat soluble vitamins, when you take them, are stored in your fat, okay? So you can accumulate and become toxic in fat soluble vitamins. Water soluble vitamins, you don't have that problem. You just pee them out, okay? So vitamin C you can take basically to tolerance, which is diarrhea, because vitamin C will have a laxative effect when the dose has gone too high. So for me, I know personally, if I take a dose of vitamin C at 2.8 grams, I'm gonna have diarrhea. I can do 1 gram doses, easy, no problem, no diarrhea. So I just do 1 gram doses every 2 hours, like in an acute situation, and no worries. So an elderly person with vitamin C, you just say, hey, I'm gonna start you, Dad, I'm gonna start you at 500 milligrams. If you don't have diarrhea with it, basically push it to diarrhea and then step down, say 250 milligrams from there, or 500 from there, whatever doesn't cause diarrhea. And of course, speak with your primary care physician before implementing these things. So vitamin C, you can be pretty free and safe with. The fat solubles, you want to know the levels because you don't want to go toxic. Because then if you're toxic, it's also hard to get things out of fat, right?
Right.
That's why I say getting rid of heavy metals is tough, because the body will sequester them in fat to kind of wall them off, and getting them out can be hard. So good question.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So you walk into like Costco or Walgreens or any of those stores and you see all these vitamins.
Yeah.
How do you know that the quality is there?
That's probably a video in itself. And without, I'm not trying to be biased here, but you really don't know that it's there. And there's actually been studies, I believe it was 2012, different police agencies went into Walgreens, Target, GNC, and they bought things off the shelf, and they did a study and said, we want to know if what is on the label is inside these capsules. And basically what they found was it wasn't. And what they found inside the capsules was like dirt and pieces of plants and like all these things that have no beneficial effect and potentially could be harmful in the to the wrong person. And so going with the Nature Made brand or whatever is risky. It's $4, but $4 for 1,000 pills of fish oil that's rancid at Costco is more expensive than $50 for 90 pills that actually does something for you. So that's why it's good to use practitioner only brands that have been third party tested and are known GMO free, gluten free, blah 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 free. That's not to say there's no quality at Costco or in a non-practitioner situation, but the big box stores that are producing 1,000 pills for $10, that's probably the evidence you need right there.
Right.
A good brand that I personally haven't been to their factory, but one of my best friends has, and he's taken the tour and seen it all behind the scenes and everything, and they're pretty available to lay people, is called Now Foods. He loves Now Foods and swears by the quality and everything. So I guess that's what I would look for on the shelves of, say, a vitamin shop or something, if you had to walk in there and say, well, which of these 1,000 things should I trust?
And you can get Now on Thrive and
Amazon and yep.
Amazon and all that. Yeah.
Yep.
A great brand.
Yep. Good question. So, I guess as a piggyback off of Janine's question is, commonly with the age population, I don't know that it's true or not, but, people will say, well, they don't have enough money. And the argument is like, well, all the money is actually in that population. The greatest transfer of wealth is coming, from them and blah, blah, blah. But so it might be more mental than not. But either way, if finances were an issue, the Now Foods brand is quality and also is affordable. I've most of the time when I see their prices compared to others, they've got good price points. So if we've got a family member in a nursing home, a lot of times it's like pulling teeth just to get them to take vitamins, even their bedpan bullets, which is like Centrum and those sorts of things. My sister's a nurse and she calls those brands bedpan bullets because they come out and tink in the bedpan just like they went in.
Yes.
All right. So if those weren't digested, that's the quality. Okay. The most expensive vitamin in the world is one that doesn't work. So it's $4.99. It's got to be good. So maybe get those people, if A, you can get your elderly family members to take vitamins, that's a win. B, give them vitamins that will do something for them. So maybe direct them towards the Now brands to start.
I've got another question along this line.
Sure.
Why don't they make more vitamins that are liquid, that are super easy to take?
Yeah, I don't know. That's probably something, the answer to that is probably something having to do with lab and or logistics. So shipping, storing liquid versions, and or maybe the liquid versions, the potency doesn't stay as well as it would in a capsule. I'm not sure exactly on that.
But if you're talking about the aged, you might have an easier time getting them to take liquid.
Yeah. True story.
Yeah.
True story.
I've heard that too. Some of them a lot more liquid have to be refrigerated, and that's like a logistical
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, and so the unfortunate issue with that than Janine is the elderly are drinking things like Boost and Ensure and thinking that they're getting their vitamins.
Right.
And really they're getting inflamed. So yeah, that's another market you could open up is liquid vitamins and pre-packaged paleo meals.
Yes.
Right? Because that's what you
Those
want me
are
to
two
do.
I'm trying to get you to open up.
Yeah, no.
I told them I don't like to cook. So
Yeah.
Like
I-
Nutrisystem.
I can go there, but I would prefer if they deliver it to my door.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. So all good thoughts and probably fertile grounds for entrepreneurs to jump into.
Mhm.
What else?
I think that's all for me.
Well, I was just going to ask at the end of your video how we can get you into Fauci's position.
Oh,
That's the real question.
yes. That is the real question. I would love to know that answer, but I don't think I'm crooked enough to get in that position.
I think we'd also lose him as our doctor if he got that position.
Yeah. But let me know if you can get me in there. I promise you this country would look different.
It would look very different.
Yeah.
Very
Yes,
different.
it would.
Yeah. So
Well, I'm praying you into somewhere where you
Thank-
can, you
thank
and all
you.
your friends can do a lot, even more than you are already.
Yeah.
thank you. Yes, accelerate me into that because the way we're headed, it's not good.
No.
I love it.